Hello everyone, this is Ileana and welcome to the new episode of Ebb of Time. Today we'll be discussing a topic that I find truly interesting. And before we start, I want you listeners to imagine a world where everyone in your community, no matter who they are, receives a guaranteed sum of money each month or maybe each year, enough to fully or partially cover the most basic needs of a human being: housing, food, heating and cooling. So this is the idea of universal basic income in very rough terms. And in today's episode, we'll be exploring what such a system could mean for individuals, for society, and for the way we understand security and dignity. And for this, I have a guest with me, Marie-Laure. I'm very happy that you joined me for this episode. I want to congratulate you again on your PhD. And can you please tell us who you are? Why did you study this as part of your PhD? And then to link with that, we can directly jump into the basic question: what is universal basic income? Which we might refer it as UBI, just as a reference for the listeners so no one is confused.
Right. First of all, I want to thank you, Ileana, for having me in your podcast. Hi to everyone. It's a really honor for me to be here and to be able to just share my research, because I feel like this sometimes we lack a bit of scientific voices in public debate. So it's always nice to be asked as an expert to just discuss something that I've been working on for so long. So thank you. So yeah, I'm Marie-Laure Mulayi. I'm currently working as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Antwerp, and I recently defended my PhD on universal basic income. And more specifically, my thesis was about studying the political feasibility of a basic income. So more in relation to public opinion, what do people think about basic income, other country differences with regard to support for basic income, which elements do people support or oppose to, and also discuss how political actors, more specifically trade union officials, position themselves toward basic income.
That's perfect. And that's the part that I'm most curious about, the public opinion, because I know that to me it feels like there are so many issues that could be controversial, but this one is actually not that controversial in my opinion. But although it is, and we will definitely discuss about that in a bit, can you explain to us first what is universal basic income? So what do we call it? Because when we first discussed with you as first date, pre-chat, whatever we can call that, you mentioned that there are many ways to it. And I also did a little bit of research and I saw that there were actually many countries that tried in a way to incorporate that, from the United States in Alaska, or in Kenya, in Iran, and also Nordics, of course. That's the one that probably is the most obvious.
Yeah, that's true. So defining a basic income, I think that's a very, very hard task to do, because the problem with basic income is people have so many definitions of how they interpret the proposal. And I would say even in the literature itself, there is not consensus. There's no consensus on how to really define it. But in general terms, you could say that the basic income is this proposal that wants to grant everyone an amount of money unconditionally. So it's a very basic definition. But when you look at more concretely the proposals that we have seen, we talked about the Alaska dividend fund, for instance. There, some people consider this as a basic income, but first of all, it's not universal. So you have to be a citizen to get it. And also it's a yearly amount, so you don't get it every month. It's also a very low amount, so you're not able to live comfortably with that amount. So in my PhD, I decided to provide some conceptual clarification on what basic income is. And I would say it's still a bit vague, but at the same time, it also kind of gives people more of an understanding of why it is so complex. So in my PhD, I define basic income as a policy idea that is rooted in the idea of giving money. So it's really a cash amount to people, and I purposely leave people very vague, unconditionally. So you have like 3 dimensions. So unconditionality, so you don't have to work for it or do anything to receive it normally. Secondly, it's individual, so it's not tied to, for instance, your family situation, whether or not you have children, your age, and so on.
As you said, because I was also trying to find a definition that would give me the answer. Okay, this is it. But I think it's very difficult because, and as you said, there are these, like in Alaska here and there, they tried. Okay, indeed, maybe the amount was not enough, but also, very importantly, it was not universal. And I find it personally, from the perspective that I'm not the scientist or I did not work on this, but to me, that part sounds the most difficult one because we barely agree on anything in this current global situation. So, how can we agree on this? And what are the ways, maybe in the literature, like other scientists, how did they see this, or how do you see this that could happen universally?
So, I mean, you're definitely right. When we think about universality, we think about including everyone, so there's no restrictions. And of course, this might create some opposition within the population because almost every social benefit has a kind of a very specific targeted beneficiary. So when you say everyone, it's for some people, it's really like, what is it about? Can everyone just apply for it, get it? Is it sustainable? So yeah, it triggers a lot of negative feelings sometimes among people. And when you look at the literature, indeed, when people are being interviewed about basic income, and besides like the unconditionality, that is also a very contentious topic, the universality always comes up as something that people oppose to. So they want to have a very clear idea of who is going to get it before supporting the proposal. And in my research, for instance, we operationalized, so we conceptualized universality as, for instance, giving it to newcomers, so including them in the proposal, giving it to only natives, people with a nationality. And then we also had like Europeans, but I mean, it's kind of the same, like the European ID, identity, and so on. And what we saw that, contrary to what we would think, that so the theoretical expectation will be when people read it's going to include newcomers, support should drastically be reduced, or but that's actually not the case, because in some countries, and now I'm like taking like a very cross European perspective, we see that there's a lot of variation in what people support and oppose to in terms of universality. In certain countries, for instance in continental Europe, Belgium, France, we see indeed there is like a stronger position towards giving it to newcomers, but in other countries, the southern countries, Portugal was in my sample, I think. Yes, Portugal, for instance. Then we don't see that pattern of rejecting newcomers, for instance. So it's a very context-dependent variable, I would say. But it's true that for some people, it might be a bit of a stretch to say universal basic income will include newcomers as well. They don't have to do anything to earn it, because it's also strongly related to this concept of people have to earn the benefits. For instance, because they have contributed to the social system for a couple of years, they have lived here, they have proven to be part of our social community. This idea of really compartmentalizing people in specific groups, the in group, the out group, I think it's something that is very much has been studied in literature on social benefits and attitudes towards inclusion, exclusion of newcomers, and so on. To answer your second question, I think, how can we, if I would know the question, then I would be in politics probably and implementing things. I think it's definitely not an easy task to do, to just decide or to have a strategy on how to make it less of a problem for people. But I would say you have to start with having a group, and then I would say in a really incremental way, perhaps including more and more people, to make it perhaps less of a stretch to already start with a very large group, but like maybe to start with a small group, and to with time, with years, to make that group bigger. For instance, you start with children, and then you add children from 6 to 7, and then you add people below, everyone below 18, and then you go on. But again, yeah, it's theoretically, I think, when we think about implementing the idea, and I think this is one of the questions people already always have, like, okay, we have this policy idea, but how can we implement it? I think When you look at the most feasible options, considering politics, public opinion, just the feasibility of a proposal, of a benefit, you have to start with a very defined population, a defined amount, which will perhaps be easily integrated in the current system, and then you can see in the future to perhaps expand it. But you start from somewhere. Perhaps you look for a group that is deemed deserving in society, and then you can, if the political climate allows it, expand the group. But obviously it starts with like a very clear, well-defined population will be eligible to the benefits.
I find this deserving point very interesting, because what does deserving really mean actually? Do we question, for instance, well, some of us do, but a big part of the people don't actually. Do we question millionaires who became super rich because they did all kinds of unethical ways of production and then become rich as deserving? Like, this is deserving? Or is being a human not enough to deserve to have a dignity, a life where you have the dignity, so you have a roof, you can feed yourself, etc., etc. I find this very interesting, and I believe, because you said that in your thesis you focused on the public opinion and you probably conducted interviews. Do you have an idea why people might be thinking on this deserving point?
Yeah. So yeah, first of all, deservingness, it's also a very theorized concept within the literature of the welfare states, welfare attitudes, especially in relation to the welfare states. So I would say in the theory they say there are different criteria people use to evaluate people's deservingness of, for instance, social benefits. And we call them the Karen criteria, with the first one being control. So is the person in control of the situation he is in? So for instance, were you fired or did you just quit your job? For instance, like in the first case, if you're fired, then it's not your control, it's out of your control. You kind of ended up in the situation. So you're more deserving than somebody who just quit his job. And then you have attitude. So how do you behave? Are you actively looking for a job, or you're just being lazy, looking at Netflix the whole day, staying at home, not really actively trying to make your situation better? So in the first case, when you're actively trying to look for a job, not being at home, you're seeing more deserving than somebody who is sitting at home. Then you have R, reciprocity. Did you already contribute to the system? And then it's really more about, did you pay taxes in the past? Because in more like corporatist welfare states, the European welfare state in general, you have to contribute to the system and then you get something in return. So like the reciprocity one is a very important one because it's a bit linked to the universality that we talked about before. Newcomers, they didn't contribute to the system yet, so they are not really seen as being reciprocal in this whole idea of welfare benefits. Then you have identity, which is also tied to the universality one. So is the person part of our in-group? And then there's a whole literature on sociology of social identities, and then it's about race, it's about religion, it's about a lot of groups. Some people identify themselves as being, I am a woman, so it's more gender identity. So sometimes more ethnic cultural identity. So it differs. And for some people, it's, if you're not part of my in group, then you're not deserving of receiving the benefits. And then lastly, you have needs. So people might think, does this person need the money? And then this is also tied to your question of millionaires. Then when people hear, okay, perhaps he's earning so much million a month, let's say, then it's definitely not deserving. When they read this person has no income or has a very low income, then they might seem more deserving of receiving something. So these 5 criteria, they kind of interplay with each other when people evaluate the deservingness of someone. So as you mentioned it depends on who evaluates the proposal and also which criteria is the most important for him or she. Because most of the time, when you look at the results, the true criteria, especially in Europe, that are very important. But I think you could also argue that outside of Europe, that they're also really relevant. Identity parts and reciprocity. Of course, need is also important, but like identity and reciprocity are very, very much important. And it's really tied, for instance, with the second one, reciprocity, to work. And then you really have this whole mentality of the workfare, the having a strong work ethic. And this is, for instance, something that I've seen during my interviews when I talk to people. And you know, I try and explain to them what a basic income is without sounding too much of a case. Because a lot of time in this discussion, it's really like, oh no, you're really pro basic income, so I'm not going to listen to you anymore. And as a researcher, I don't really have an opinion on basic income. For me, it's just about doing research about social policy, and sometimes the basic income is listed as one of the policy proposals that would reduce inequalities. So I think as researchers, we're kind of urged to kind of look into that and see to what extent it's feasible. And other people do also research on the policy outcomes of basic income in terms of poverty and so on. So that's why I started this PhD. But in general, I really felt in my discussions with people, there's a lot of opposition, and people usually have an opinion on basic income. It's not like a neutral concept, but it's really very much polarized in terms of like people being against it. They're strongly against it because of those four criteria, and people being for it, they are really, really very radical in their argumentation, and sometimes a bit irrational as well. But yeah, you really have two camps.
There are so many points that I want to pick up already. So maybe I can start from here, because I will come back to the point where I think some of the counter arguments who do not want universal basic income is because, well, I think it will increase migration. I'm pretty sure it's like one of the first things that why people are against. And it will make people lazy. That's something also probably that comes to my mind that could come from those scams. But before that, you mentioned that the universal basic income will or could, I don't know how you framed it exactly, that will reduce inequalities. I wonder if there are studies or some pilot projects that kind of prove that universal basic income will lead to that. And I'm asking this because ideally, when you give people a certain amount of money that they can survive with it, it practically reduces inequalities. But then how do we make sure that, because this is how the market works currently, your salary increases, but then also everything else is increasing. So how do we make sure that when we give this universal basic income, that the rents or everything, the prices will jump in a way that the basic income will not meet those expenditures, basically?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So first of all, I will say I'm not an economist, so I will not go into the details of inflation. What I can say based on past research that I've read, one of my colleagues, she's working on the University of Antwerp on this topic, and she wrote a paper, I think 2 years ago, on the poverty outcomes of basic income, specifically focusing on poverty outcomes. And in her paper, they did a micro simulation. So they have this program where they can really kind of manipulate certain benefits and reduce certain things and kind of see which outcomes they will have. And in their model, they had three types of basic income: one of a low amount, like an average amount, and then a very high amount. And they tested it with perhaps abolishing certain benefits or keeping all the benefits. And they tried to really be budget neutral, because it's also a very important element in this whole discussion of outcomes, economic outcomes, macro, micro, micro outcomes. And what they saw is indeed that basic income doesn't always reduce inequalities. For instance, in the case where you really abolish everything and only give a high amount to people, and I think in their simulation the high amount was like 1,500. I think so, but I will have to double check. But in any case, it seems a lot, but on the long term, it's not that much, because our social security is covering a lot of costs that we have to pay monthly. When you go to the doctor, you don't pay a lot, actually, when you have surgery and so on. So at the end, the high amount was not enough for people, and you create a big group of people who will end up in poverty. I think one of their conclusion was you have to find, if you would like to see a basic income being implemented, then you should actually go for more of a partial basic income with like a lower or more average amount, something in between. Why? Because when you abolish everything, then there are certain groups in society with more needs, and their needs will not be met anymore if you abolish everything. And in the case of like basic income being partial, so it's a lower amount and it complements, it's add up on top of like existing benefits, then you create extra coverage for people, and this might indeed reduce poverty. In terms of like the more macroeconomics, inflation, you are totally right. If we would just implement the basic income now, it will not only lead to like a budget deficit, because we will not be able to afford it, and secondly, probably because people have more money, it will create like an economic vicious circle of prices like increasing, and at the end the extra money has no value anymore because everything costs more. So but I would still say there are a lot of economic research on this, and that's why I feel like basic income is very ideologically driven, in the sense that the more, I would say, liberal economies, they will find a solution to counter inflation, taxes or anything else. But on the more conservative side, then they will like, no, here is my result, like I run this model and I find inflation, so it's a no for basic income. So at the end, I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. Of course, we have to be aware of like the more exogenous shocks of like implementing a basic income, because indeed if people have more money, they will spend it more, and then the money will lose value. But I don't think that fearing inflation should be an enough reason to just throw the whole idea away. I think there are ways to make it more economically viable. It really depends on more ideology and wanting to make things viable, feasible. But I think you have two camps. I totally agree with the idea that if you would just implement the basic income right away, that you'll definitely create inflation, and the whole purpose of a basic income will just disappear.
But I think then, again, I don't want to speculate though, but I just like commenting. Then eventually you will need to interfere with the market then. So I'm not sure the economic liberal ideology will actually prefer that, because it's not laissez-faire, it's not at all, because you're just saying now, okay, we are adding this amount of money to everyone's account basically, but the market will remain the same. And to do that, you need a big amount of interference basically to the market. Otherwise, it will just, as you said, create an inflation, which I think people, of course, will not be really happy with that, I assume. But also, there are many points actually to discuss on this, because when you give this money to the people, I think there will be a camp of people, and you can actually shed light on that, because I'm sure this was something that you already asked on your interviews. People might have the prejudice that if a certain person gets this money on their account, they will spend it badly. So they will not use it to meet their basic needs, basically, but they will just spend it to like drugs and alcohol and this kind of stuff. But also that they will become lazy, so they will not need to work, which is actually not really true, because that will require quite a lot of money. We are not discussing about giving people just free salaries, but just a certain amount. So how is this perceived by the public or by the group that you interviewed?
So first of all, like the first aspect of financial literacy, I think it's a very relevant point. Unfortunately, within the context of my research, I haven't really touched upon that, but I do have like insight into other contexts. During my PhD, I did a research stay at Stanford University, and there I kind of was involved in this whole project on baby bonds. So what is baby bonds? So in the US, they don't really have child benefits, so universal child benefits. They have certain targeted benefits for parents, and parents can also get like tax reductions and so on, but they don't have child benefits. And in California, they were like thinking about this idea of creating a fund for parents that they can use when their child is 18 years, and they call it baby bonds. So the state will put every month like a particular amount of money, $100, $50, until a child is 18, and once a child is 18, he'll get the money or she'll get the money and just start his life or her life with it. And the whole idea behind baby bond is, okay, we need to reduce inequalities, and a lot of time inequalities start from like inheritance capital. So that's that's the idea. But of course, this is not a new idea. There was another experiment in London, I think, in the UK. I'm not sure which state. I think it was like a country experiment. So the state already did that. So they created this fund for the children, and at 18 years they just saw, okay, what happened with the money? Nothing happens. There is no reducing inequality. Why? Two reasons. First of all, as you said, people daily expenses. So a lot of time the child's money is used to cover certain household expenses. So it goes away to that. And secondly, financial literacy. People just spend it. And because of, among other things, like the daily expenses, but also other expenses, but they are not really related to their education, or they don't improve their living. So their conclusion was like, it doesn't really help. We should look for other policy options. And in California, when I was at Stanford, they were also thinking about this idea of, okay, no, based on this previous experiment, that it was not that successful because it did not reduce any inequalities. And one of the many reasons why it did not work is because people were not really investing the money; they were just spending it. And I think in the baby bond, I think it has not been implemented yet. It's more of a research phase, but they will also try to see to what extent, for instance, when they give certain courses to people about how to use the money, if it will make a difference, of course. But yeah, that's not something that we will be able to see now, because yeah, if you have to wait 18 years for them to use it, then it will all, I mean, it's in a long time. But right away, they are already doing some research interviews with potential beneficiary of the baby bond to see to what extent this will work out. But we don't really know if it works out. And I think I'm not really sure if I have seen any literature on the causal effect between providing financial education and the outcomes of, for instance, reducing inequalities. But I'm sure there might be some effect, but I'm not sure if it could perhaps change a whole sample or of a whole research population. But this is something that has been intriguing researchers. This is something that policymakers also want to know, because as you mentioned, if people hear that the taxpayers' money is being used to, I don't know, fund like a lavish lifestyle, they might not want it. But then again, I think this is more of a capitalistic Marxist literature. Do we need to control people's expenses? That's an open debate. Some people would say yes, we need to do it because this is taxpayers' money. So we need to know what people are doing with it. Other people will say no, it's the community's money. Everyone is contributing to it, everyone will receive it. So we actually don't need to control people. And I think that's also, again, like a very ideological discussion. For some people, it might be a yes or a no. But at the end, the idea of people misusing the money is a very strong component of why a basic income creates a lot of opposition within the population.
I'm trying to think in my own mind right now, like why would people react that way? Because there is so much corruption going around with the politicians and etc. So no one asks them where they spend their money. But then we are discussing, because that's also public money, that's also taxpayers' money. But when it's a person, like a random daily person that you see on the street, then you suddenly start to think, okay, this is my money actually. And I think that already happens. I hear.
Sorry to interrupt, but do you know why? Do you know why people think like that? It has been theorized as well. It's political science theory. People, they do not compare themselves to people at the upper on the like the upper
Upper class.
they don't, so people don't compare themselves with the upper class. They only compare themselves to their neighborhood, like people near in the same class as them. So that's a bit the reason why they're more concerned of like their neighborhood and misusing the money than, for instance, a politician. But I would say, I would say that when you look at, for instance, the results of polls about political trust and so on. I mean, when you ask people about do you trust politicians, why don't you trust them? One of the reasons is they're misusing our money. I mean, it kind of, they think about it, because when they have to vote or express their trust, they are not voting for them, or they indicate that they don't trust them. But it's true that people seem to think more directly about their neighbor being lazy or not working than, for instance, like someone from the upper class who is also not working and, for instance, perhaps living off, I don't know, dividends or something else. But to be able to have that lifestyle, then they had to do some things that were not always very like legal or ethically correct. But that's less of a concern than your neighbor being at home instead of working.
Absolutely. And I didn't know about this theory, but it absolutely makes sense. But also, indeed, people don't trust politicians and etc., etc. But I don't think that they do not vote for the ones they think they are corrupt, because I can just give like 10 politician names that are very openly corrupt and yet elected. So I think they're indeed, as you said, because it's very easy for me to say, oh, like this neighbor, and then with my money, like with my tax money, they're doing this and that, they're having fun, etc. But when it's the politician, I know that they steal, I know that they're corrupt, but then what do I do? Nothing really, because I focus on other things. Because if they are like more charismatic leaders, if they're like a populist, then yeah, basically manipulating it. But yeah, that is going a bit beyond the conversation. But I think we can pick up on the laziness part, because my idea when I talk about universal basic income, and I know that it's not an example of a UBI, but in ancient Greece, in Athens, when obviously just men and the elite had the money, so basically the basic income for themselves, and they had the time then to think, to create art, philosophy, etc., etc. Of course, that was very flawed, because women were not citizens, obviously there were slaves, and non-citizen men were also not included. But this is the impression that I have when I think about this, because I take myself, for instance, as an example. If I had this kind of an opportunity where I don't need to think about if I can pay my rent or if I can buy food, etc., then I will still work, first of all, personally. And I think a lot of people will still work, because work is not, in this current system, we are mostly obliged to do it. But I think most of the people are also either liking their jobs, or they like doing something. Maybe they don't like their jobs, but they like doing something. And for me, it's just an opportunity to have actually like a more free time where I can think, that I can rest, that I can create new things, and there where like a community can be created around it, because everyone will have the same opportunity to have more free time, etc. But I see a lot, because as I said, I did some research for this episode, obviously, but also from the previous discussions I had with some friends. People are very concerned about that people will become lazy. And very directly related to that, there is this point on who will do the dirty work discussion. So the dirty work, I'm saying it not because I think it's a dirty work, but that's how it's framed, basically, like working in the, I don't know, like very heavy jobs, basically, that you will think that you will not do it if you had enough money to survive. So maybe we can cover this topic, actually.
Yeah, I know it's a very valid argument, or just a very valid point. Why? Because yeah, when you talk with people, it's really tied to this conditionality aspect that I said was very contentious within public opinion. And so, like, the whole idea of work is important, and we live in a society where your work defines how people treat you, your value, and so on, because it's income, of course, it's tied to your income. So I think it's a valid point to be concerned about people working. Why? Because at the end, especially in European welfare states, they are being financed by contributions through work. So if people don't work anymore, then they are not contributing to social security anymore. It's not sustainable, and then we have a big problem. So I think it's a fair point. But what you said made me think about this book by Philippe Van Parijs. He's one of the big names in the basic income debate. And I think he has like this book, I think he calls basic income like a freedom dividend. And he says, is it really a problem that people spend the day at the beach surfing? For me, it's not a problem. I mean, he earns it. he contributed to the system and now he's getting something back from it. So I don't have any moral opposition to him going to surf and spending his day at the beach. I think in his book he really covers this whole aspect of like the ethical normative justifications of basic income, and there has been a lot of research by Philippe van Parijs, Julia Pididadnur, Yannick van der Borcht, like philosophers, political scientists, who have tried to really dig deeper into these more ethical, philosophical questions, I would say. But when you look at it more like realistically, I think we should still be concerned, because when you look at the current research, of course, there is no real basic income at place. But when you look at, for instance, the Alaska dividend, like when you look at the results from the papers on work behavior and so on, what you see is women tend to work less since the implementation of the Alaska dividend fund, the yearly amount. There was like a reduce in work among women. And when you look specifically what type of women with children, women with lower income, lower educated women. So there's like this inequality, and the researchers, I think one of their explanation was because they don't earn a lot of money, they just like stop working because I think, okay, it's enough for me to cover certain basic needs. Then you create inequalities within the household, which is totally opposite to what basic income wants to achieve. And I think there are other, I think very recently, I think in the US, an experiment was also done with like giving money to people and seeing what they do with it. And also, they sometimes stop working. They were not creating businesses or going back to school or doing community work. They just stopped working. So, but I mean, this is just one of the many papers on the behavioral economics of basic income. And I would even dare to say, for every paper that says people stop working, there's like an opposite paper, like another paper saying like they don't stop working. So I think this discussion has not been settled yet for me in the literature, because of course to stop working it depends on the amount, because if you only get, I don't know, like 100 euro a month, it's not enough for you to stop working. But if you will get, I don't know, 2,000 euros, it would be another story. So it depends really on the amount of money you get. And those research also indicate that it depends on the type of job you're doing. Do you like your job? If you don't like your job, of course, if you get some money that helps you kind of live comfortably, then you will probably be more, you think more about quitting your job than just staying on your job, so on. So it depends on a lot of factors. But I think when you say about, to come back to what you said about the shitty jobs, it's also related to that. Because of course, and I think it has also been briefly theorized about what do we do with those shitty jobs. Maybe this can help people raise their income. Why? Because they will already get a basic income, so they will ask for better jobs from their employers. There is like a side of the literature that argues, okay, the basic income could help those people in those shitty jobs negotiate higher salaries, so you will perhaps pay more for a cleaning woman, for instance, than what we are paying actually. But again, this is very theoretical. We don't know if that will happen. It is tied to so many factors and probably also linked to the inflation we're talking about. It could also be that employers say, okay, you're getting this basic income. No, it's going to be even lower because you are already receiving the money. So employers could actually consider the basic income as an income and not like a benefit, or so they will feel less concerned about like giving decent wages to people. That's another discussion. But in general, I think the question of laziness is also really much tied to like how do we conceptualize work nowadays? Is work still relevant? And I think there has been there has been discussion about Gen Z being very much more into I work to live, not I live to work. So this whole idea of work is just secondary for me. I want to really achieve like self-actualization in terms of like psychology terms, which means that people like living their life, enjoying their life, being happy, and thinking about other stuff than just like regular day-to-day working stuff. So I think there are some research indicating that for us, for Gen Z, we are less worried about work. For instance, people quit their job more easily. They love working from home. They're job hopping, so they're not tied to a workplace. So there are a lot of things that are going on right now in the world, which also kind of makes us question whether work is still as relevant as it was in the past. It is still relevant in economic terms because it provides you an income, but more in, I would say, philosophical term or more subjective term. Do people still love their job? Do they still want to climb the corporate ladder? Or is it more of a no, like the soft life stream literature, or like whole rhetoric of I'm don't want to work, I just want to be able to live my life or live comfortably. So for me, work is more of a income providing stuff than a social status type of thing. So I don't feel good because of my job, but the other way the other way around. So there's a lot of discussion, and again, it's a debate, but I would say that a basic income still is really relevant because nowadays, with the whole automation and technological transformation, which is something that I'm currently working on also because I'm very much interested in like AI and the future of work and how it will impact people's attitudes towards a lot of things. But you could ask the question, will people still have a job in perhaps 30 years because you see the advancement in technology? And perhaps in 20 years, robots will be able to do a lot of stuff. They're already replacing a lot of employment categories. I'm thinking about translators, for instance, which is I think a job that will perhaps in the coming years really be in danger because of the whole AI movement. But you have a lot of other jobs. It's real. It's a really important question, I think really crucial in this economy for policymakers who really have strong debates to do research about this, because at the end, if you want to give people something, a meaningful life, does it have to revolve around work, or can we give people like a meaningful life with other types of activities, you know? So I think it's an open debate, but it really allows us to rethink our society and maybe have different way of like organizing it.
A couple of years ago, I don't know how many years ago, and I don't really like naming him but Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, they were actually saying that the universal basic income will be the inevitable. I don't know what they think right now because these people are not very stable in their thinking or whatever. And I don't think they thought about universal basic income in a way that they will be taxed more, so there will be more money. But I'm just leaving that aside. They say that because they also think that with automation, a lot of jobs will be lost. I mean, personally, I wouldn't mind, but then there is a system that is going, and then we are working, and then we are spending a lot of our time in the offices or at workplaces, wherever, and that keeps us under control actually. So work is not only about the ethics but also keeping us under control in a way that, because if I have more time to think it, I will be probably more unhappy with the inequalities in the world, with everything that is going on. So then I don't know to what extent it's actually realistic that there will be a lot of people losing their job and it will not be substituted, because then what do you do with these people? You either create a system that gives like a universal basic income basically, so they actually do not have to do those jobs, or maybe they can upskill or reskill, etc., but then they will have more time. Or you don't do any of these, they basically end up either homeless or in very precarious situations, and they will be still unhappy. So I think, and this topic is very related with everything. We even touch on the gender aspect of it, because it's not about only universal basic income if you don't have a system that supports childcare or elderly care or sick care, etc. But also on the other side with the AI and automation, which I also believe that it's very interesting discussion, because yeah, okay, replace 10 million people. What do you do with them? They will start be unhappy. They will start to have more time to think about what's going on. They will start to have more opinions about the politics inevitably, because they will not have enough money to survive, or they will just basically be more awake, less tired to see what's happening around. So I I want to ask you actually what you think about it, because you said that you're currently working on this topic, the future of work with automation and etc. So how do you see this?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's for me it's a crucial question. I think in our century, next to climate change and all the sustainability questions, I think AI and technological change has to be one of the priorities of governments because we are not, I think, realizing the impact of LLMs and all of the technologies, their impact on work, on life in general. I think very recently I was talking with a friend of mine and she was talking to me and she said to me, ChatGPT is my best friend. He's my therapist. I say everything to him. And then I realized psychologists are also being involved in this discussion of losing their job. And then she was like, yeah, no, I also ask questions about how to do my hair, the products for my hair. I'm like, okay. So it's really going far in why how people are using ChatGPT for instance or other LLMs. So LLMs is large language models to be clear. So I think in my current research, I really focused on social protection because I think indeed with the emergence of these new technologies, people will perhaps feel more insecure because we don't feel it now, but in the coming years there will be some structural changes. And studies and experts they say, and I think history has also proven that even if you have new technologies, people just change the type of jobs they're doing, but they can't stay. I still think that, for instance, now you could perhaps need 100 people to do 100 tasks, but in the future we'll need 50 people, half of them, to do the same job. Because with the help of AI, their job goes much faster, so they don't need as much people as they needed previously. So in terms of social protection, I think we really need to think about how are we going to respond to those changes. And in my current research, it's a proposal. I really want to go deeper into that aspect of risks, technological risk perceptions. How do people perceive risk? Is it tied to like existing problems? Are you currently losing your job? Are we thinking about losing the job? Who are these people? Are we talking more about lower educated or even higher educated? Because nowadays ChatGPT also is threatening the jobs of higher educated. So you have a lot of categories of people that are, in my opinion, vulnerable to being replaced by AI. In terms of social protection, you have a lot of policy ideas really tying into that. For instance, you have the job guarantee programs, which is also kind of similar to basic income, but a bit more realistic in political terms, I would say, because we had some parties advocating for a job guarantee. So, job guarantee would be that the government subsidize jobs for people so that they can keep on working, and this can be financed through a robot tax. But again, this is also
Space. So this is like about taxing companies who are replacing humans with robots and using these
exactly.
taxes.
Yes, the
Okay.
robotax. It's one of the many proposals to kind of compensate perhaps the loss of income that you will get from taxes because now you have robots and so on. So robot tax is one of the many proposals, and you will tax the companies that replace humans by robots so that you can finance social security, for instance. And the job guarantee is also very costly because the government is subsidizing jobs, so you're not receiving external income, you're just giving the income back to the people. So it's also one of the proposals to kind of respond to those changes. But I would say that now it's not a priority yet. I think we should really already start thinking about the proposal because even when you look at European Union, there are a lot of programs to increase digitalization in public services, public governance. So the policymakers, they really want to integrate AI into our current way of working. So the fact that you're doing this makes that you're also kind of accelerating a process of increased digitalization and perhaps also decreasing the need of like human work. So I think it raises a lot of questions. And in terms of social protection, also, do we need more compensating policies? Do we need to provide income or jobs to people? Or do we need to re-educate them, upskilling, for instance? I think there needs to be perhaps a collaboration between those AI companies, those big tech companies who are developing all of these algorithms to kind of perhaps guide governments in how they could respond to that. Because if we think that in the future people will have to control the machines, then we perhaps need to integrate in education right now some more technology courses for people to be prepared for that. But we are not really doing that at this moment. So I think, yeah, it's a very urgent matter, and I would say even at the same level as climate change. And unfortunately, it's not being it is a priority, but more in terms of we need to integrate digitalization in our services. We need to make use of it to benefit our work, but not in terms of like how can this technology threaten people, make them feel uncertain about their job, and perhaps in the future how if there are jobs replaced, maybe not all of the jobs, but some jobs, how do we care for people who will lose their job? Are there enough things to do for them? And how do we as a society prepare for that? So these are real questions that I think should be answered, and I really hope with my project, but there are many other projects already working on this, this could be tackled.
I think both these topics, like the universal basic income and how automation and AI and etc. will replace, and this like robot tax or whatever, I think they all can come back to like several questions that needs to be answered. How do we see our future, not only in terms of work, because the work ethics, the work culture was created to increase efficiency, to increase productivity, and automation and AI is also for the same thing. So the idea is to have the maximum output with minimum time and with minimum money, basically, to get the most benefit out of it. But then what kind of future do we want to create for ourselves? So we need also, it's not only about creating something, like it's not about producing something, but then we have artists, we have creative, we have thinkers. How can you measure this? How can you measure a philosopher's work, or how can you measure an artist's work? And this is very important because we are more and more going towards, okay, let's increase production and efficiency and everything, but then where is the rest? And there I think these kind of policies can come into play to support it, because I mean, I'll be fine if like millions of jobs are replaced. If mine is replaced, I'm fine, but I will not be happy to be left like homeless, because there is a surplus that is being created. The economy is going as it goes because this automation helps with that. There's like people getting rich probably with those things. Then I will have to also benefit from it. But then we need to get rid of this idea of you need to work to deserve things and etc. No, if there is a future where automation can do everything, which honestly, personally, I don't believe in it, but let's say that there is, then why do I even need to think about these things? Like, let me, as you said, like about that book, like, let me lay on the beach, let me, I don't know, just stare at the wall and think about things. So this is the very important thing, and it's very nice that you're also focusing on that, because you worked on universal basic income and now also focusing on other alternatives or other types of policies. So maybe as like a almost wrap up question, how do you link these things in your work, and how do you actually see, because you said you're a scientist, so you are more from a neutral point of view, but how do you see it, and how do you see is the most optimal maybe way that is also human, not optimal in terms of efficiency, of course?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Also a very challenging one. I would say I'm still in the beginning of the reflection, because I think this really requires a lot of thinking, perhaps also talking with people who lost their job, or afraid to lose their job. So it's a whole process of really taking into account different perspectives, the state perspective, the employer's perspectives, those tech companies, like how do they view it, and of course like people's ideas, perceptions. So it's a whole process, and I feel like I'm, as an individual, I mean, I might think about it, but this requires like a very much of a bigger, a larger coalition of people being committed to really addressing those issues. Because now you see more and more of a tech optimist, I would say, like, yes, let's increase, let's let's integrate as much tech as possible in our working. It's a very good thing to do. We have to work less and so on. But all the things you said, all of these externalities are not really being considered right now because they seem so far away. Losing the job, it will not happen now. We don't know. But I think as a society, you need to be prepared for the worst case scenario. I think we had recent examples of pandemics that really shaked up all the system, and we really saw that we were not prepared for certain things. And I think, especially for the state, they have an important role in protecting their citizens. Protecting means also anticipating certain changes, and that's why I think right now I'm not able to answer your question because I think that I don't really have the answer yet. But what I do think is what you said is real. So we have technological risks. We have increased use of digitalization in public services, private services, in our daily lives, actually, in every part of our lives. And all of these contextual elements are having an impact on people. And we need to see to what extent we can really prepare for the possible outcomes, even if it doesn't happen. We already have an idea what to do, and I think it will happen for certain jobs. It definitely will happen. I'm thinking about, for instance, how do you call it, marketers, like the ones,
Salespeople.
salespeople, exactly. I mean, for them, you can just. I mean, I recently had this talk with like an AI guru, like he's very into it, and he was working developing like this whole he was a professor, actually. I think he was a professor. He was not an AI guru. He was a professor, but who is an AI guru? But he was developing a company that would replace interviewers. So you would just type in the questions, and the algorithm would call people randomly and do the interviews with them, and be able to respond and ask follow-up questions and so on without interviewers. And it costs less money, it's more efficient and so on. So yeah, you have a lot of jobs that are already being at risk right now, and I don't think that we will have a replacement for all of those people, right? So we really need to, and as I said in the beginning, to, I think, rethink education, for instance. Like, are all of these disciplines still relevant? If they are, how can we perhaps integrate a bit more elements to make them more modern in a way? Because it's like the computers. 50, 60 years ago, people went to school with like a pen, and they would just like write things down in a notebook. But now I think when I go to university, almost all the students, they have a computer, they're just writing with it, right? So this means there's like an evolution, and people just, you hop on a train and you just ride along with it. So I think it is a very important question, and I think for me as a social policy scientist, I think about people, protecting them and so on. So it is something that I want to work on, and I hope that I will have an answer to in coming years. But it is a very, very big question.
You touched on a point that I find it just drives me crazy when I hear, like, when I have to call, I don't know, for a service for something, and then I hear the automated, like the robot message, and I insist on not talking to that. I want human interaction. And you cannot believe how many times I actually solved my problem by jumping that and talking to people rather than talking to that stupid robot. I think this is a thing that a lot of people also miss, because indeed, as you said, they are just like optimists, but they are so excited and like, let's calm down, because I need the human interaction, because my problem, humans will solve my problem. Now they're also
Absolutely.
even talking about like replacing judges or like lawyers. No, because this is so human.
Even. Exactly. And perhaps to just follow up on that, recently I was reading this paper about AI in HR. So they're not having they don't have HR people interviewing people for jobs. They're just sending people a link, and then people will talk with like an HR, like a projection of a person, and it will analyze your behavior And I think one of the results was like there was discrimination because they don't recognize people's emotions. So they might categorize my emotion as being I'm mad. Meanwhile, it's culturally linked that I will not smile a lot. But for them, they have very clear indicators of like what should work, what is an optimistic person, someone that smiles a lot. And if you don't smile a lot, you have a very low score on that. So it's also very much tied to what you're saying, like the loss of personal contacts and maybe to tie it back to the discussion of today, what if those people never get the job offer, so they will be out of a job as well, right? Because they never get someone that really understands them and kind of see through like those indicators that the machine has to find. So yeah, they need an income, they need a basic income.
Yeah. I mean, my Eastern European face will never pass those
Yeah.
HRs, I think. And also, like, maybe indeed we are moving away from the topic, but those systems are also very, like, problematic in terms of racism and etc. because
Of
these
course.
they did not come from the sky, and we trained them basically, and our system is like super flawed in many ways, in
Mhm.
gender discrimination but also racial discrimination, so the system is fed by those. But
Okay.
also you said that you did not have an answer to my question, which I don't agree actually, because I don't expect you to tell me the secret of the world actually, but you said you talked about protecting people and anticipating. And I think this is very important because this is basically, I mean, I work in EU policy, and anticipation is not there at all. And we have been through so many crises, but we are not learning our lesson. And before everything, we need to think about protecting people and anticipating the problems that might come, not when they are there, because that will, like, a lot of people will suffer because of that. So I think you had an answer to that question, and you will probably go, like, move away from there and build your research on that. But I'm really happy
Fair
to
enough.
have you in this episode, because I think the discussion started from somewhere and we ended in like a bit more different but very interesting topic. So thank you so much for joining. And if you have like, if you want to basically wrap up your mind, or if you want to say one or two more things, please, the floor is yours.
So what I would say is for people, so to come back to the basic income idea, it's perhaps very easy to form an opinion based on ideas that you have, judgments that you have, based on people being lazy or people not deserving the basic income or just an income from the state. But I think the discussion is way more complex. It's about certain groups that are underprotected. I'm talking about young people, especially in contributory welfare states such as Belgium. You have to contribute to be able to benefit from the system. So when you just started work, you just graduated, you just started working, you are not entitled to a lot of benefits. It's about elderly people who don't have enough pensions. It's about single mothers. It's about a lot of people that could benefit from having extra protection. And I think that, I mean, you could perhaps disagree with giving it to everyone, but I think there are some elements in the basic income that are very, very interesting to look into and that deserve more research. So I think that people, before forming your opinion or expressing your position to the proposal, which is what people always do, like most of the time I would say, at least do some research, read what people say, read some results, read some opinion papers on the matter. But I will prefer you to read some research on the results. You have a lot of programs that are actually helping people who are not protected enough, and I think that the whole debate is really, it's not about giving people money who don't deserve it. It's about having a system that provides like a safety net to everyone. So yeah, I think that's for me the most important thing. And I hope people that I succeeded in giving them some insights into why some people are in favor of it, of why like opposing the idea is perhaps not the best judgment to have.
Thank you so much. I genuinely hope that this episode will spark some interest or curiosity. Agree, disagree, doesn't matter, to look for further. And there is, like, I mean, the internet is huge. You can find a lot of
Mhm.
open resource things. So I really hope that we can have this discussion, and I look forward to actually even have some feedbacks on this. And yeah, I think Marie-Laure, you will also probably be open to answer any questions if there is any.
Of course.
Yeah, and again, thank you so much. Um, uh, I'm very, very happy to know you also, and that you accepted to join on a Friday evening. I want to highlight that because it's not easy.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. And thank you for the people who took their time to listen to this. And see you on the
Pleasure.
next
Thank you.
episode.